Can democracy override human rights? Can science override democracy? Do we even have real science? We certainly don't have a democracy. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Very concerning news coming out, if you can call it news. More like propaganda. Lies, deceit. Corporations masquerading as news outlets. This came out of Reuters, so it was picked up by a bunch of different outlets. U.S. government to launch overwhelming COVID-19 vaccine campaign by November. Now, there's a lot of concerning stuff in here. Mainly, they say that they're going to have a 4 to 6 week campaign right before they launch the vaccine, which they're predicting to be roughly at the end of the year or early next year. Look at this. The promotional campaign would be in November, they're forecasting. And this was a senior administration official, presumably from the Trump administration, as it says here. It could be a CDC official. The article is not specific in that regard. I know a lot of these different organizations have, quote, education money. A lot of these new bills will bake in education money, which is really just propaganda money that we have to pay for. So they want to eliminate any lag between Americans hearing of the vaccine and when they can get vaccinated. I wonder why that is. And they say that they're walking a fine line between getting Americans really excited about vaccines and missing expectations versus having a bunch of vaccines in the warehouse and not as many people want to get it. But the first one, like, what's up with the missing expectations part of this? We're either going to miss expectations or we're going to have bought way too many vaccines. Whoops. It's like, you guys scare me. You scare me. It says here, you may not hear a lot about promoting vaccines over the airwaves in August and September, but you'll be overwhelmed by it come November. This is the most concerning line in the whole thing, potentially. The U.S. government has begun preparing to distribute the vaccines, including talking to private companies about developing technology to track their deployment and monitor who has received them. So is this how they're going to make sure that their compliance level is met? Is this how they're going to make sure that the 65-70% of Americans take it while they dish out their collective punishment to all of us? I don't know. So COVID vaccine skeptics are not stopping anyone from getting vaccinated. A lot of us feel morally obligated, though, to tell the other side of the story, so people don't just hear from big pharma mouthpieces. The government and media is really rigged in favor of the huge pharma companies due to massive lobbying, advertising, campaign contributions, bribery, blackmail, etc. Many of us vaccine skeptics would prefer that the government not siphon tons of public money to pharmaceutical companies and give them legal protections while spending public money on propaganda to encourage the people to buy the big pharma product, or worse yet, buy the products on our behalf outright with public money without asking us. We have this bizarre world where they tell us vaccines are safe and effective, yet the actual Supreme Court case law indicates that the U.S. Supreme Court says vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. Therefore, people can't sue vaccine companies for damages. Which one is it? Is it safe or is it unsafe? You can't have it both ways, you hypocrites. Vaccines are known to contain mercury, formaldehyde, aluminum, polysorbate 80, cell lines from aborted fetuses, tissue from hamsters, dog kidneys, monkeys, peanut oil, adjuvants, and much more. Just because they argue that dangerous substances are administered at tolerable doses, it does not let them off the hook. A tolerable amount of a dangerous poison is to no sane person safe. There is nothing moral in saying that the lives of a few people already nearing their death are more important than everyone else around the world to live unmolested by needles, governments, experimental injections, or shutdowns. Any forcing of vaccines, either outright or by collective or individual punishments, is a huge violation of some of the most basic human rights, such as the right to not be harmed and the right to not be subjected to any medical procedure without giving one's informed consent. And it adds to these polls that are saying 50% of Americans either not sure or outright refusing the vaccine that hasn't been, when one becomes available, as it says here. Are polls just propaganda? That's what I'm starting to wonder. Why would people do a survey and then publish the results to everyone for free, just out of the goodness of their heart? There's a huge incentive there, especially in this case where they're pushing big pharmaceutical company products to hundreds of millions, if not billions, billions of people. There's a huge financial incentive to fabricate poll results. Also, to fabricate clinical trial results. And that is one good thing. It's hard to prove, but these companies are liable for damages if they fail to comply with regulatory requirements, if they engage in fraud, intentional or wrongful withholding of information, or other criminal or illegal activity. But it's hard to prove. It's really hard to prove. People ought to be able to sue if they get a medication and it messes with their livelihoods. That's a clear example of damages, if anything is. And especially if it's forced, if it's mandated, or if it's on the schedule required for schooling or for travel. So pick one. Pick one. Is it vaccines are extremely safe? If that's the case, we need to make drug companies and manufacturers fully liable for damages that they inflict. Or are they going to say that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe? If that's the case, then we definitely need to be able to opt out. We definitely need to be able to speak out against it on the internet. We definitely don't need to be buying it with our government or giving money to these companies engaging in this. And we definitely shouldn't be propagandizing on these companies' behalves. That's not right. Also, I think this mRNA stuff is some crazy technology that they are cooking up with tremendous amounts of public funds. They can do all sorts of inhumane stuff with the fruits of this research. They could deploy it on unsuspecting people in tons of different ways, not just injection. This all reminds me of how the US used NASA, with the help of lots of imported Nazi scientists, Operation Paperclip, by the way. But that aside, the US used NASA to develop a ton of military technology under the banner of beating the Russians in the moon race. Now we're seeing a bunch of research, tons of research in broad daylight to win the battle on COVID. And this research is being done into genetic programming of living humans. Very questionably moral. I would definitely side on that being immoral. Especially if you're going to skip animal trials. But even animal trials are immoral in this regard. Even, I don't know, I would say even plant trials. All that Monsanto stuff they're doing is bad news waiting to happen. So let me know what you think in the comments about all this public funding going into a project that they are going to spend a bunch of other public money to propagandize people into buying. Are you like me in thinking that forcing 70% of the population to get the shot via collective punishment, propaganda, and censorship is a huge crime against humanity? This one's from The Atlantic. When a vaccine arrives, people will ignore the anti-vaxxers. Even if some Americans opt out, the country will still reach herd immunity. So this person's comparing it with measles. They're saying they reached out to different medical providers or medical healthcare providers, and they think that more people will get COVID-19 because everybody's seen the effects. They've seen, as they say here, the empty shops. They have direct experience with dying patients and empty shops. It's like, well, yeah, we have the scary media. Is that what you're talking about? And the shutdown, the government shutdown, is that what you're talking about? Because that could be ended. We don't need a vaccine for that. So interesting. It says, the country would achieve herd immunity even if a sizable minority of Americans, sizable minority, I thought it was saying majority. So they're still pushing this talking point, and it goes in line with this last article where they say they're going to be tracking who has received the vaccines. So if they say we need 70% of the people to take the vaccine before we can open up society, that's kind of like forcing us to get vaccines, right? It's collective punishment, which is a war crime, I hear. It's a collective punishment on the entire group until that statistic is reached. So they're coercing us into it. They're also going to be coercing a lot of people into it through public school and travel restrictions, is my guess. But they can put out these articles all they want, and they can try to make the vaccine skeptics look like they're somehow dangerous to the group because they prefer natural immunity. They're being really disingenuous, I think, because they're telling people, hey, we're not afraid. We're not afraid of these vaccine skeptics, when in reality, I think they're very afraid based on how much damage control they're doing. And they're trying to beat anyone to the punch with the story of what people should think about vaccines. To make things worse, many people realize that they can free ride on the efforts of others. Has anybody ever heard anybody make that argument? Hey man, everyone else is going to get vaccinated, so why should I? No, the argument is, I don't think that vaccine is safe, and I'm not going to get it. Who knows what's in that? My body is a temple. That's the argument that I hear. What I hear the other side saying is, look at those people trying to free ride off of all of our heroicism. Look at those people over there trying to free ride off of our heroic efforts. It's like, well, I think you guys are kind of reading into it a little bit much. Why don't you take the person's own words that's when they say that it's for safety reasons? Undermining society's efforts is deeply immoral. Look at this. Undermining society's efforts to keep the disease under control is deeply immoral, especially since a small proportion of children cannot safely take the vaccine because their immune system is compromised. So if they can't take the vaccine, why is that? It's because the vaccine is unsafe to them, right? So is the science settled on vaccines? Do you guys really have a safe and effective product? No, you just admitted that it's not safe to at least certain people. The Supreme Court, I was going to get to this later. Let's get to it right now. The Supreme Court says right here in 2011, and most relevant to the present case, the Act expressly eliminates liability for a vaccine's unavoidable adverse side effects. Unavoidable adverse side effects, no liability? And then it quotes right here the other act. No vaccine manufacturer shall be liable in a civil action for damages arising from a vaccine-related injury or death associated with the administration of a vaccine after October 1988. That's 30 plus years ago. If the injury or death resulted from side effects that were unavoidable, even though the vaccine was properly prepared and was accompanied by proper directions and warnings. Properly prepared. You can't sue the manufacturer if you get hurt. So are we undermining society's efforts, or are we trying to look out for the smallest minority in the world, the individual? And I'm really tired of this killing, the slaughter of the individual by the collective. It's inexcusable, and that is deeply immoral. Give me a break. This is interesting. The author writes, but will enough people get it? What happens if, as one CBS poll suggests, 1 in 5 Americans refuses to cooperate? Refuses to cooperate, as in not allow them to plunge a needle in our arm and inject us with a experimental serum? An emergency use authorization vaccine? No, thank you. So I'm going to skip over the fluff here. It says, according to the experts I spoke with, you have to get 50 to 70% of the people for herd immunity. This means that somewhere between 45 and 65% of the American population will need to be vaccinated. Will need to be vaccinated, 45 to 65%. What happens if we don't hit those numbers? Then do we have to stay on shutdown until people take it for the team? Is that what they're implying here? Let's see. Okay, that's the end of the article. Here's another anti-freedom article from Science Magazine. Just 50% of Americans plan to get a COVID-19 vaccine. Here's how to win over the rest. I don't see them talking about a flood of marketing from Big Pharma. Which information is more flooding and saturating the free flow of information? Is it Big Pharma and their money they're spending and the bribes they're kicking out? Or is it people on the internet saying, I don't really want a vaccine. Is it true that you guys put aluminum and mercury and fetal tissue and or whatever it's called, the aborted cell lines? Recent polls have found that as few as 50% of people in the United States are committed to receiving a vaccine, with another quarter wavering. Among black people, 40% said they won't get a vaccine. So here's the graphic. Dark red is yes. Light pink is no. So yeah, you can see that so-called black people are definitely not for the vaccine compared to so-called white people who are more in favor of it. But also, what could this be leading people to believe? Because I don't really believe, I don't trust polls that come out. We're just supposed to believe that out of the goodness of their heart, some organization polled a bunch of people on our behalf and told us the right numbers. We just get handed these numbers on a silver platter and we're supposed to believe them. You know that statistics affect people, especially if they think that they're aggregate statistics that refer to what the entire group is thinking. So why would the controllers not rig surveys and polls to get people to think that the group is thinking something that it's not? That's just something we have to consider. And I covered this here as well. Another thing we have to consider. This is straight from the Supreme Court. Brushewitz versus Wyeth, LLC. The Act expressly eliminates liability for a vaccine's unavoidable adverse side effects. Since 1988, vaccine manufacturers cannot have been found liable for side effects, even if the vaccine was properly prepared.